Hello and welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. My name is Laura Bradburn and it is Friday. I am joined on this Friday by Jim Orr, who is in the mothership. How you doing, Jim?
In the oven is the mothership. Yeah. It's like sauna in here. Yeah.
Yeah, no cost of living crisis at the Axom HQ.
No, it's up to number 4 on there. So there you go.
And we're joined as well by Alan Morrison of the Huddle Breakdown. How you doing, Alan?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm actually quite cold in comparison with the sounds of it, because I'm in the house on my own.
Come in here, son. Come in here.
I'm not allowed to have heating on because I'm on my own. So,
It's great. It's
I could
great
actually put a jumper on. To be fair, it is my own fault.
It's great.
You could look at some of the new hoodies that Celtic have released. Apparently, they're going to be quite popular, but we'll see.
That's for the kids, Laura. That's for the kids.
It's not such a good look on a man my age.
Listen, I'm a 34-year-old sitting here in a Harry Potter hoodie. I don't know what I've got to talk about, but we'll crack on anyway. Friday is a difficult one for us sometimes because we are picking apart the bones of things that other people have picked apart, but we do have the pleasure of previewing the upcoming game at the weekend, which we'll do as well. Jim, a couple of weeks since you've been on, obviously. We'll ask you first and foremost about the most recent match, the match against Leipzig, which you were at, obviously. What was your takeaway from it? Obviously disappointing, given that it really puts our chances of any sort of European football after Christmas at very remote. But what was your overall opinion of the performance?
I think the reaction to it in social media is a bit over the top. I thought we played really well. Didn't deserve to lose the game. They were a better team, slightly better team. Really open game. Some really good performances. If you're behind Ange, then you have to watch these kind of games because that's the only way you're going to get better, I think. I mean, you could play these games and try and pack the midfield and don't do anything daft and play for a point. Do you learn anything if you do that? I don't think you do. And I thought Matt O'Reilly, Carter Vickers, Jens were outstanding the other night. The forwards let us down a wee bit. You know, I mean, I've said before, I don't think Maeda and Abada are wingers because I don't think they've got great close control. I don't think the crossing's particularly good. I think Kyogo, you need to give him the service. So that was a disappointment. But I thought defence were great. I thought midfield were okay. I thought Hatate was okay, and he gets slaughtered as well because he's such a brave wee player. Hatate he takes the ball when there's 5 guys around him and he tries to play the difficult pass, whereas, you know, it's dead easy to play simple passes. And that, I just think, I like what Ange's doing. I think most fans like what Ange's doing. And we're going to get a few, you know, defeats playing the way we're playing. And that's just the way it's going to be. Would you rather that than, as I said, packing the midfield and playing for points and what have you? I mean, I think the European record has been awful in the past number of years. And that's no Ange's fault. You know, you go on social media and people are saying, I'm fed up with this. You think, well, what do you want to do? You're fed up, what do you want to do? So I think playing the way we're playing, we will get better. And Matt O'Reilly's performance the other night, the next game he'll be even better and even better. I was thinking that earlier about what's our best performance in the last 10 years? Barcelona. Right? 17% possession or something. I think we have, well, Alan would know that better than me. Very little possession. We depend on a goalkeeper to make great saves. We play one guy up front. What did we do after that? Nothing at all. We didn't learn anything from that game. It was a great victory, one of the greatest of all time, But moving forward, the record in Europe is poor. I think you only learn by playing the way we're playing. And I used to play golf. I don't play golf anymore. Many moons ago. And I only used the same 2 or 3 clubs. Because I was comfortable with those 2 or 3 clubs. So if you're going to drive, that's a 3-iron. And I would never try and pitch the ball because that's too difficult. So I'd never get any better. I was always that standard. Whereas if I took lessons at the time and learned how to drive properly and pitch properly, I might have still been playing golf. Right? So you need, if you're going to try something different, you have to stick at it. And the other thing I just was just appalled by the other night was that second goal goes in and the number of people who left. It was just ridiculous. And I get it, people have to go because maybe they're working the next day and they have to catch a train or a bus or whatever it is. But just, you know, people talk about the EPL being a bit of a tourist league. I think in the Champions League night, you get a lot of tourist fans there. Certainly when I look around me, there's lots of people I don't recognise who are really down on the team. That's the other thing that annoys the hell out of me, that it does no good. It's counterproductive. Why would you slag players during a game? Don't get that at all. Because when Ange talks about, what did he say the other week about, there's an interview he did in Australia, it says something like Celtic to the fans as an extension of their family, or words to that effect. He says something like that. And I've been involved in kids football for 20 years, a few years ago, and what you say to the parents is that never criticise. Don't criticise the kids. Encourage the kids. They might be having an absolute stinker. They might be missing sitters, or if they're in goals, letting in daft goals, or whatever. But never, ever criticise them. Encourage them. Because if you criticise them, that will make them worse, basically. And I've seen that in the Champions League nights, when we're playing a better quality of opposition, the level of criticism is ridiculous. And I think a lot of that's coming from the tourist fans. Wouldn't it be great to get a Champions League ticket? Just a shame that there's a lot of Celtic fans out there who love to get a Champions League ticket. Who are not coming from, people are saying, oh, my uncle's coming over from Canada, it'd be great to get a Champions League ticket. No. Loads of people in Glasgow would like a Champions League ticket and never get a sniff of it. So I'd like to see a bit more encouragement. I mean, I've been the boys, the section of the boys have been moved to about 10 seats for me. And the whole game, they stand up and they cheer and they shout. And I leave with my ears ringing. But it's just solid encouragement the whole time. Was it the Maeda? That was the one. Maeda gets the ball, and he's not a great winger, and he just skies it into the night. And the amount of abuse that the guy got, he knows he's made a mistake. Don't criticise him. It's really difficult. My oldest son managed to get a ticket for the Motherwell game, and he was behind the dugout, and he said the abuse that Greg Taylor got was ridiculous. Like, these are human beings. Help them. Encourage them, get behind Ange. Leipzig are a good team. I'm sure Alan will explain why they're a good team, but they're a really good team with top-class players worth a lot of money. We were second favourites to win the game the other night, and it was a one-goal game, I felt. And I suppose that kind of, because it's Celtic, thing, well, they're going to get it at some point. But the longer the game went, you think, just take one chance. And with loads of chances. And didn't take them, and that's been the story of the Champions League campaign. But I'd much rather go out playing the way we're playing just now than trying to defend and trying to play for points here and there. I think we've been unlucky with the timing of these games. I think if we'd have got Leipzig in the first game, when we're all over the place, we might have taken points off them at that point in time. We didn't. Hey-ho, that's football. But I just thought we're dead unlucky the other night. I think the reaction has been over the top. I think we'll get there under the big man.
Yeah, I'll come back to you on the Ange thing and the lessons he's maybe learned, but before we do that, I'll get Alan's thoughts on it. Alan, very often when I talk to you on this show, what's observed is slightly different from what the stats show, and that's understandable. I think what Jim says there is something that I certainly observed watching the game, that we had plenty of clear-cut chances. Whether the quality of those chances was as good as maybe we think they were, or whether our ability to finish them is an issue, it remains to be seen. But what did you think of the quality of the chances that we were making, and how good do you think, as Jim said, how good do you think Leipzig are actually as a team to try and topple?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, and I know this is going to make really boring television and radio, but I pretty much agree with everything that Jim said. I think he summarised it really, really well. All the points actually. So were the chances good chances? Well, so there's one of the interesting things as we go through is that more and more sites and resources are available for people to go and look at quite detailed statistics about the game compared to when I started. And you'll see different expected goals models now come into play. So you can look at FOTMob, you can look at different places now online, Y-Scout, and et cetera, and on it goes. And they all give you slightly different answers to that question. And I've got my own quite sort of antiquated expected goals model, which tends to actually work out to be an average of all the other so-called sophisticated models. So make of that what you will. And I had Celtic slightly ahead in terms of expected goals. There wasn't a lot in it. It was 1.86 to 1.63, which But if you look at all the other data in the game, this was a very, very even game overall. A draw would have been a fair and just result in many respects. I think they did edge a few things. They got into our box a lot more often. 29 possessions in our box compared to we managed only 18. Their forward and direct passing was probably better. They outscored us on what I call the pack passing. But other than that, in every other regard, it was an incredibly even game, and at this level, moments of fortune. So, for example, their opening goal, the ball gets passed in. Juranovic actually intercepts it, and of course at that point the ball could pretty much go anywhere, but it falls perfectly onto Silva's chest, where he's at the right body angle to sort of batter O'Reilly out the way, and then it forces him to the byline, and the only option he's got is the chip back, which was a brilliant chip back, and Werner's header was a brilliant header. But little things like that, could go a different way. And then similarly, a few minutes later, where Celtic actually really did have a go at them after that initial goal, Giakoumakis gets on the end of Forrest's incredible cross, and he's being pulled back, and there's no VAR review. Which I found surprising, really. And again, so I'm not saying this was overall a hard luck story. And also the other point that I would make is that Celtic could have played even better last night on that night and actually dominated the game and still lost 2-0, because that's the quality of the opposition that we're up against. And people are going to have to understand that. This is very different. And that really speaks to Jim's point about fan reaction. That's just so out of kilter with the reality of the environment that Celtic are now operating in terms of the opposition. Also, I'll come back to Leipzig, that question, just to finish off your question about chance quality. And again, these things are never quite as clear cut, and different XG models will come up with different answers. But for example, the first chance in the first minute that Maeda had, well, it's a header, which is always the most difficult, and it's behind him, and he's having to crouch to make it. So, so although it's only 4 or 5 yards out from goal, I think that's quite a difficult chance. You've got Kyogo's header where Haksabanovic picks him out with a lovely cross. But again, it's a header from like 12 yards out. Now, how many goals do you see scored from headers from 12 yards? There's not many, right? So although it was disappointing he didn't get it on target, it would have been still quite a low XG overall, because it's a header and because of the distance that he was from the goal. The Giakoumakis chance was obviously a good one, and I've just said there's kind of mitigation there in terms of he was being kind of hampered. But then you look at their 2 goals, and you look at how Werner finished that one, and you look at how expertly Forsberg scored the second, was absolutely clinical, and that is the difference. And it would be glib to say it's the only difference. But it is a difference, and I think there was a confidence about their finishing, which we don't have yet. We've not earned the right as a team, and our strikers haven't got that confidence yet to think, if I get the ball in the middle of the goal, I'm going to score here, because this is all quite new to them. So, listen, I've actually finished watching it back this morning, and I was actually encouraged at the time, and then very deflated at the end, as I'm sure we all were. But actually, my overriding feeling is what I always look for is performance. So the only tiny little thing that I nearly disagreed with Jim about was when he said our best performance was when we beat Barcelona. Only slight correction. I mean, it was the best result. Wasn't the best performance.
Sorry,
performance. So to me, because I mean, it just goes to prove that it was the exception that proves the rule, right? I mean, this is what can happen in football. You can play teams like that, and you can spaz a 1-goal win, but you don't learn anything. Jim's absolutely spot on with that comment. But
I agree. In terms of that was the best result, and that's all fans tend to see.
Yeah, indeed.
Is that when you look back, what was the highlight the last 10 years? Barcelona. As you say, Alan, it was a great defensive performance, and we were a bit lucky with Big Foster, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But that's what fans look at, and I just think what's happened over the last year is Ange's raised the expectations to up here somewhere, whereas last year it was down there. So we go into this Champions League campaign thinking we could get second place, we could qualify for that. That was a lot of people's expectations. Ange is responsible for raising those expectations, but we don't have Champions League players. And what the big chap's trying to do is make them into Champions League. We obviously can't buy Champions League players. He has to make them into Champions League players. And Matt O'Reilly could easily be a Champions League player, as could Rio Hatate. Need more games, need to be playing those kind of games on the front foot, looking forward. That will help their development and that will help the team's development. But I just think Ange's raised the expectations, and that was the thing that annoyed me the most about the game on Tuesday night, was the reaction of a lot of fans. It wasn't just one or two, and that's when you look around, you think, don't recognise him, don't recognise her, and they're criticising the whole game. It's really off-putting. And what are their expectations? You're playing against guys who are worth £60 million. It's just that's just. And I think the fans have to. And it's not a. I was going to say it's a reality check. It's a reality check in terms of this is where we are. It's not a bad thing. It's just kind of where we are, and just get behind the team. And I've been in here for a few years. We've been talking about Seville and talking about the Celtic fans were kind of voted the best fans, etc. It's easy to be a fan when your team's doing well. I've got the utmost admiration for fans that go and watch Motherwells and Partick Thistles and Cowden Beasts, because they don't win games, but they get behind their team, and you have to get behind the team. If that was a league game the other night with 5 minutes to go and we're 2 goals down, they wouldn't have left, or the people there wouldn't have left, because we can get 2 goals back in the last 5 minutes. And just the resignation of so many people, and I, as I said, I don't have the evidence. Can't say I want to have the evidence of this, but I think a lot of them are just, they came along for the Champions League game. That was it.
So I think absolutely spot on again. And again, I look at performance, right? That's first and foremost. The result can be down to the lucky or the luck or the bad luck, as I said. But what really impressed me the most was just the improvement from the game the week before in terms of our mainly off the ball. Okay, so we are creating roughly. We're getting between 1.5 2 xG every game now, which against that level of opposition is pretty good. And I will confidently predict if we keep making those chances, we will start taking them at some point. That's just how football works. But at the other, it's at the other end that I think that we need to concentrate, actually, because we're continuing to give up a lot of chances as well. But what was vastly improved from last week to this was the team organisation. So in Leipzig, the spacing was just all over the place. There was a huge gap between the forwards and the midfield, and a huge gap between the forwards, the midfield and the defence. I think they got spooked in the first couple of minutes when they saw the pace of Nkunku and they played a couple of balls in behind, and then they dropped too deep after that. And they should have been brave and played a high line, which is how we play. So the spacing was all over the place. Leipzig played through us at will, and we lost a lot of chances. And if that hadn't been Leipzig, if that had been Man City, then you'd have been last week. You could have been looking at the sort of 7-1 that was administered the other night in Glasgow. That's how bad it could have been. So this week was much improved. So when we pressed a little bit more selectively, and we pressed a little bit more cohesively, which we didn't do in Leipzig. And then the second thing was once we established that they've got possession, we fell back into a nice shape, a nice comfortable 4-4-2 shape with very few gaps between the lines. And actually, when Leipzig were confronted with that, they didn't really have any answer to it, because they're a team that wants to play you on the break. And that's why they're such a dangerous team for Celtic to play. It's a bit like boxing, where they say, styles make fights, not so forth. It's a similar thing. Leipzig love to play a team like Celtic, who play similar type of football, but play a high line and are open to counter. And we saw that in Leipzig, especially. They were devastating on the counter. So they were always going to be, to me, almost the toughest opponents in a sense, and they're very good at it. And that's the thing to remember here. To pick up on Jim's point, how are our players going to learn if they don't play and they don't make mistakes and they don't get exposed? That's the only way you can learn. That's what Ange said. He said, I can't accelerate people going through playing 90 minutes or 60 minutes and being exposed to Nkunku, having Haidara, absolutely batter you in midfield like happened to Hatate all through the second half before he was taken off. If you don't learn, it's the only way you're going to learn, unfortunately, and it is painful. Learning is painful. It always is. So I think we have to stick with them, because so long as we see continual, and it might be incremental and it might be gradual, but as long as we see improvement, that's all we can ask of any human being in any job that they do. Can you keep improving? Can you learn from your mistakes? And can you keep improving? And the other night, I thought we improved massively, but there's still a huge gap. They're an exceptional team. Their business model is to pick up some of the best young athletic players in Europe. You know, the likes of Haidara, Szoboszlai. You know, these are players who they picked up as teenagers for 20, 30 million euros. Celtic aren't in that market and will not be in that market so long as we're landlocked in a low money league, as it were. So that's the challenge, is to overcome these kinds of players and make the Matt O'Reillys and the Hatatis and the Bernabés believe that they can play at that level.
I think also, just to follow Alan's point there, is about the physicality and the athleticism of the players. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
We don't have the players to play the way Ange wants to play. That's not a criticism, it's just where we are. You can't just magic these guys up. And I mean, Ange made the point about a lot of the players couldn't, are not tall enough to get a ride in Disneyland. You know, so it's the thing I noticed about the first goal in Leipzig. In Leipzig, the big guy just brushed Juranovic off the ball. You know, bang, he was away, goal. So a much more physically robust right back might have had a bit more joy there. I always go back to I thought when we played Bodo, whenever that was back in February, I thought their three centre backs were exceptional, big, strong, physical athletes, and I'm thinking, I think that's the way Ange wants to play. He wants to play with those kind of guys. Whereas what we've got, and again, it's not meant as a criticism, is that Carter Vickers is a different type of centre half. Starfelt's a different type. They look kind of awkward when they do certain things. Whereas when I saw the Bodo guys, you're thinking those guys would fit in ideally into an Ange team. So I think we do need a bit of physicality, which maybe isn't there. A bit more, because all these guys, when you play them, they always look like big athletes, good on the ball, technically very good, and we look like a bunch of wee guys who are, you know, doing their best. You know.
Yeah, I mean they're four forward players who were all very fast, all technically excellent. And they're all about 6 foot, and they're all strong. You know, if Rio Hatati was the same dimensions as Szoboszlai, you know, if he was 6 foot and quite strong, Hatati wouldn't be at Celtic, because because of the way that the aggression that he puts into his passing, the quick change of direction, he wouldn't be at Celtic. It's as simple as that. Yeah. So, you know, we have to try and make these players into Champions League players. But you're absolutely spot on. We do have a physicality and athleticism deficit, but it's not just that. It has to be allied to high-end technical skills, which is what even at a club like Leipzig they're able to do. That's the project.
Yeah. Emil Forsberg, who was another incredible Leipzig player, said that he thinks I think Celtic are a really good team. They've some fantastic players in midfield and at the back. I think they play some really good 1-2 combinations that impressed me a lot. Also, the way they did that in the last third, but against us, they didn't have the ability to score. Like I said, they need the finishing touch a little bit more, and I'm sure it will come. So it's pretty obvious, even to opposition, that you know, while we're creating chances, we're not entirely clinical in finishing, and hopefully that will come. Just wanted to bring up a comment here from Ibrox55 and count. I think you need to recount, but anyway, Marco Rose, Celtic is a fun place to visit. God knows what Jurgen Klopp thinks of Ibrox in that case, because I'm sure he pretty much enjoyed himself as well.
I think up to the game starts, a Champions League night, fantastic atmosphere. When you get to the bit when they're all flagging the big circle Champions League logo and the noise, it's deafening, it's absolutely brilliant. And then the game starts. And then people start criticising from minute one, and that's when it starts to go down a bit. And that gives the opposition encouragement. So my big takeaway from the other night was just to be a bit more patient with the team, a bit more encouragement, because I think we'll get there.
Yeah, Jim, one thing I wanted to ask you about actually was one of the things you mentioned about Hatate, how he tries to find passes that nobody else finds, and it's something I've said before as well that I really like about him, is he's a risk taker. Sometimes that pays off, sometimes, as it did the other night, it doesn't pay off. But you also mentioned Ange and taking those risks in order to learn lessons. What lessons do you think he has learned from these 4 games in the Champions League with 2 remaining?
I don't think he's learned anything he didn't know beforehand. I don't think Ange was in there thinking we're going to blow these teams away. In each of the games, they've been well in it up to about an hour or so. And the point Alan made earlier, fine margins. I mean, we put the ball in the net first. It's a different dynamic to the game. Then all the players think, well, we've scored. We've got some belief. We've got something to hang on to. And the opposite for the opposition. Hold on, we're in the game here. We've just lost a goal. winning up a game here. They'll then maybe come out a bit more. They'll leave spaces. We've fast players in the break, the Yotas, the Kyogos, Maedas, So these games are just such fine margins, and that's why you need to stick with the team. I don't think Ange's learned anything he didn't know. I think he knew that we were a pot 4 team going into this. And depending on the luck, a wee bit of luck at the timing of the games, as I said earlier. I mean, nobody expected Shakhtar to win 4-1 in Leipzig.
Or draw with Madrid.
Or draw with Madrid. But I think if Leipzig had taken care of Shakhtar, then we'd have said Real and Leipzig are going to go through, and it's a straight fight for that third place. That kind of blew everything away at the very start. Hold on, and then Leipzig get a new manager, they get that bounce. And as Alan said, these are all high quality players. And then they've got a new manager, and then all of a sudden we get them at a time when you really don't want to get them. Cameron and Carter Vickers didn't play in that first game, and Alan talked about we're a lot better on Tuesday night. Maybe he was one of the reasons that we're better.
That's fair.
Callum McGregor gets injured halfway through the first half over there, with loads of good chances last week over there, didn't take them. A wee bit of luck here and there, it might have been different. But I think Ange knows that he doesn't have the finished article in terms of the players that he's got. His job is to either to try and get these kind of rough diamonds and make them. So somebody like Matt O'Reilly, he must have been very enthused by his performance the other night, that he shows he can compete. Hatate against Madrid, he can compete. So if he can compete at that level, we need another 1 or 2 players in there as well. To go back to the physicality, athleticism thing, he knows he needs maybe more than that kind of type of player. They're not there. You can't magic these things up. I think he'll be disappointed that we're not going to go any further in the Champions League, because he'd have loved to have done that. But I think he's quite a realist and knows that, we are where we are with this. And but for a wee bit of luck, I think we'd have certainly got into into that third place. But hey ho, we are where we are.
We are where we are indeed. Alan, I think to try and end on a positive note as far as the conversation about Tuesday night is concerned, I wanted to ask you, Jim's mentioned some players that he's admired throughout the Champions League run. Who's impressed you, both maybe against Leipzig, but in the 4 games, regardless of the results? What Celtic players have stood out to you? One, just to start the ball rolling, one that I felt, certainly from the eye test anyway, that I thought had a fantastic game, maybe his best game so far in a Celtic shirt, was Haksabanovic. I thought he really grew into the role that he's been given since McGregor's been injured and there's been a space made for him in the team. But is there anybody else that you think perhaps has upped their market value through their performances in Europe?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I've been very much focusing on how the team are performing as a cohesive unit more than individuals. That's been my focus, and I'll come back to that because I will try and not avoid answering your question.
Be fair for everybody watching. Alan does a lot of research but doesn't know what I'm going to ask him. So,
so listen. I think Haksabanovic. Listen, I have this little rule. It's not me that has it. I kind of found a rule and found that everyone else seems to have found it at the same time or before, which is that if you're going to evaluate a player using data, about 900 minutes of data is probably the minimum that you need. So it's about 10 games worth of data, right? And obviously we don't have that from Haksabanovic. But I did a piece on him and Bernabé and Gore as well. Haksabanovic is so far. I don't want to get everyone too excited, but I'm a little bit excited by him, I have to say. So take that for what it's worth. He looks like a really. What I love is the fact he's incredibly creative, but he also, unlike Hatate, who turns the ball over a lot, Haksabanovic doesn't. So he's quite careful on the ball, like a James Forrest might be, but he's also incredibly creative, and he's also. I just love the look of him. He's got these old-fashioned kind of bow legs, and he's quite strong, but he's quite small, low centre of gravity, great balance, bit of pace about him, a bit of devil about him. I just think he's got something, and I'm really excited to see him. I'm impressed with the fact that I think he's pretty much always been a winger, and he's actually come in and played as a number 10 and really made a difference. He's got on the ball, and he's tried to make things happen. He set up 3 of our chances the other night. In the time that he was on. I think he's incredibly exciting, and I hope he gets an extended run in the team. He's certainly one that's impressed. Matt, or as Jim signposted at the beginning in his excellent summary, Matt O'Reilly was exceptional on Tuesday. Sorry, I'll just give you a couple of stats just to back that up. and they're all actually all defensive, right? He was successful with 13 challenges, interceptions, right? That's 4 more than any other Celtic player, right? He recovered the ball. He actually recovered the ball, so forced a turnover, or was turned over the opposition 5 times, which is 2 more than any other player. He won the ball back in his own defensive third 5 times, which is 2 more than any other player. You know, he also had the highest pass backing score as well, and he actually had the highest overall expected scoring contribution, which means if you looked at expected goals and expected assists, he had the highest total. So that is just a brilliant all-round performance.
Can I just ask, Alan, what is a pass backing score?
Yeah, sure. So a pack pass is a forward pass, and it takes an opponent out the game, which means, you know, I pass to Jim, you're in front of me, I pass to Jim, you're now behind the ball. So in terms of defending your goal, you're out the game. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a pack pass. So so depending on who you've packed, so if you were a striker, I'd give myself 1 point. If you were a midfielder, I'd give myself 2. And if you were a defender and I got it through to Jim, I'd give myself 3. Because clearly, if you take a defender out of the game with a forward pass, you're probably in quite a good situation. Right. So that's kind of how it works, right? So people like Hatate and O'Reilly trying very aggressive vertical forward passing, you know, generally will generate quite high packing scores, but it also recognises the other side of the equation, which is that Jim's got to move into space and be in a good position for me to pass to him. So it recognises both of those actions, right? So that's why it's such a powerful stat. So O'Reilly was exceptional. I think, you know, Carter Vickers, like you said, made a great difference being back as well. But I as I say, I was more focusing on the individual team performances, and I do think that where we have been consistent, and this is pretty consistent with how all the teams that Ange manages, is he manages to make them consistently attackingly potent. So our expected goals, the number of chances we're creating, is very high for the caliber of the opposition that we're playing. We're just not taking the chances. But as I say, over time, if we keep creating those chances, we will eventually start to take some of these. Now, I don't want to end on a downer, but I would say that the not the intractable issue, but the very difficult to solve issue that he has, in my view, is that, you know, when we play domestically, we've got about 70% possession, anywhere between 65 and 70% of the ball. We're not without the ball for much of the game. What that means is that we can press very aggressively, and we're not pressing for too long, and we're probably pressing against teams. And again, no intended disrespect, but if you're pressing Motherwell's centre back, he doesn't quite have the technical ability of a Gvardiol or a Rudiger or whatever for Real Madrid. So we force turnovers quite quickly. In the Champions League, we're getting 40% of the ball. So right, so think of it in terms of, you've only got so much pressing energy in the tank, right? And when that energy's gone, it's gone. You've only got so many sprints in you. You've only got so many recovery runs that you make. So when the press is beaten, and good teams will beat the press, and when the press is beaten, you have to get back. That's a recovery run. That's a sprint like hell to get back and get goal side, right? You've only got so many of those in you during the game. And the slightly intractable problem that we have is, domestically, that way of playing works really well, and in fact, we're incredibly consistent in how we implement it.
Yeah, you probably only have to make those runs a few
very
times
periodically.
Yeah.
In Europe, when you've only got 40% of the ball, you're making them more often. It's as simple. I can't make it any simpler than that, right? So this is the circle. This is the circle that needs squared. Is how do we play with the same pressing intensity when we've only got 40% of the ball? That's the question he has to find an answer to. And the answer can only be we're more selective. Our pressing is of a higher quality. There's more cohesion. And that only comes through understanding, communication, playing together for longer, and being a right good team that understands, if I go, you go, and Jim goes, and we all go together, what's the trigger? We all react. And if it looks like the press isn't on, we quickly drop back into our shape, and that we're really efficient about that, and we're very consistent about it. Because if you're not, you get nights like the other week when it was 3-1 going on 5-1. That's what will happen. So this is the thing. This is the one thing, the one area that I think we need to kind of resolve.
Yeah. Jim, Alan touched on it there with some good defensive stats from Matt O'Reilly. That's maybe reflective of the increased role he's had to take in that way since McGregor got injured. Are you encouraged to see the midfielders, taking more of that role on, or do you think it restricts what they're able to do going forward? Where's the balance between that?
Well, unlike Alan, I do no research at all, so it's a good opportunity. I mean, obviously, it's a shame that Callum McGregor's out, but it's such an opportunity for Matt O'Reilly. Maybe that's his best position. Who knows? Sometimes in adversity, you actually find some things you wouldn't maybe have found before. So I like O'Reilly, I like Hatate, and when Callum plays, that's a pretty solid midfield sitting in there. I think my concern is further forward. I share Alan's view of Haksabanovic. I think he's a great player. I think he's really well built. I think he's good on the ball, and he puts a good cross in. And that's not like Abada and Maeda. I mean, Abada and Maeda have got other qualities, absolutely, but Haksabanovic to me in the one wing, Jota in the other, and then at this point in time, Yakimaki's down the centre. Of the players we have at the club, that's my front three, because the big man in the centre will feed off good balls from the wing. And I think Haksabanovic and Jota have also got the skills to cut inside and do something inside. That's been the big disappointment with the Champions League, the forwards, basically. And obviously the fact they're not scoring goals, but they've never looked convincing. And I've said that before, that it's one thing when you scored a couple of goals against Dundee United and you're through for your hat-trick and you calmly slot it away. It's another thing when you're playing Real Madrid in the first 20 minutes and there's millions of people watching on TV and you kind of freeze a wee bit, so we need a bit more composure. Abada last Saturday we played St Johnstone, last Saturday, could have scored a hat-trick. Unlike him, could have scored a hat-trick. So I think, what was the question? O'Reilly, I think he's a great player. I think he's somebody who will become a Champions League player and will become a Champions League by playing more games like he played the other night. I think the midfield were kind of okay. I think defence were kind of okay. It's the forwards needs a bit of attention, and if they'd have been just a wee bit better in this campaign, who knows? Who knows
indeed. Alan, I think it's an interesting situation to be stuck in, that kind of situation where essentially the European journey is over, but we still have 2 games to play, one of which comes at the Bernabeu. We'll obviously talk more in detail about them closer to the games themselves, but what are you hoping to see at the European level, at least in these last 2 games, given that they are, while not completely dead rubbers, are going to do very little to impact what our remaining time in the tournament is?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's still upside to it in terms of exposure and in terms of coefficient and in terms of money. I mean, all these other things, right? So it's important that Celtic, are on the front foot with these, and I'm sure, I've got no doubt, the manager will have them up for those games. I'll be looking for signs of improvement of the things that I've just spoken about, really, which is improved defensive cohesion, improved pressing decision making, improved defensive shape. But I've got no doubt if we keep taking our chances, keep creating those chances, we will take them. I understand where Jim's coming from. Abada and Maeda are quite clearly not in good form at the moment, and that's not helping in terms of either Kyogo or in terms of the chances of finishing the chances that we are creating. So to me, that's just a case of getting the right people who are playing well. Injuries are starting to take a toll now. I think I agree with Jim. I think on form, Haksabanovic and Jota would be a good sort of foil for Kyogo. I think Kyogo's movement is just so much better, and his touch than Giakoumakis. In these big games against quality opposition, I'd still tend to go that way. I love the big guy. He comes on and makes a difference for sure. So yeah, these are the things though that I'll be looking for. It's more for me. It's more about our performance off the ball that I'll be sort of focusing on, I guess, because I'm happy that we're creating chances, but we're still giving up a lot of chances at the other end. And and there's a lot of them are happening late in the game as we tire, because as I say, we can't keep up the way that we're playing when we've only got 40% of the ball, and therefore after about 65 minutes, we become a very tired team. And that, as I say, these are the things that I think are going to be difficult to fix, but that's what I'll be looking at.
Speaking of tiredness and how it might affect us going forward, it could affect us domestically as well as in Europe. Domestically, we have Hibs coming up this weekend. Jim, I'll come to you first on that. Hibs are a team who are, about as on form as any team in the league. They've won 4 of their last 5. Their only defeat coming out of those 5 games in their last match against Dundee United. I guess with the number of games that we're playing at the moment, we're starting to see some injuries. We're starting to see a need to rely on more and more members of the squad. Do you anticipate any problems resulting from that against Hibs at the weekend, given that they are, one of the stronger teams in the league this season?
Last time I was on a couple of weeks ago, I said the Motherwell game might be quite an indication as to where we are, because was the St Mirren game a one-off? Was it a bit of a blip? And I think it spooked us. I think it spooked the team, spooked the fans, in terms of before then we were kind of all conquering. It's a matter of how many goals, etc. And then last time I was on, I said, well, if we go out and score 4 or 5 against Motherwell, then it's back to normal service, and we can have scraped it. Although we should have won the game far more convincingly. I mean, if that Juranovic free kick goes in, we go on and win 4 or 5-0. And I think the manner of the goal we lost spooked the team and spooked the fans as well, because it was such a bizarre goal to lose.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was Hart's fault, Juranovic. If you're going to pass the ball back to the goalkeeper, you don't pass it within the goal. You pass it to the side. I mean, another, just when I thought of that, the Joe Hart one in Leipzig, if you're going to make those passes, you don't make them down the centre, you make them down the wing. So, a couple of basic mistakes, and I thought that goal spooked us a bit. So, St Mirren spooked us by dropping points, and I thought the goal we lost kind of spooked us a wee bit as well. So, we ended up scraping a win. We scraped a win last week as well. So, in terms of results, we're kind of scraping by. Hibs are a better team. I think... I thought they were quite inconsistent, and they realised they were third in the league. That was a bit of research there. And so obviously they're not as inconsistent as I thought. Martin Boyle, obviously a kind of dangerous guy. I think it'll maybe a tough game tomorrow. But I think all we've got to do is just keep winning until we get to the break. We look as if we're a tired team for some reason. Maybe it's time to give other guys a game. McCarthy's wee cameo at St Johnstone last week, I thought was quite encouraging. Whether he's a guy to play, I'm not very sure. We'll make lots of chances. We take the chances, we win the game, no bother. We don't, then it might be a bit of another kind of nervy game tomorrow. But I'd like to think we'd end up winning by 2-3-1, something like that.
That'd be interesting to see. Alan, this you're gonna kill me here, because I'm going to spring something on you that you will not have had a chance to research. But just while I was looking up the Hibs results, they've actually had a man sent off in 3 of the last... Not a man sent off themselves. Their opposition have had a man sent off in 3 of the last 5 games of that winning streak that they've had. I guess what I want to ask is, do you think there's reason to be optimistic that they're not quite as strong as their record suggests? If they are going up against teams with 10 men, how significant will that have been in contributing to their victories, do you think?
No, it definitely has an impact, because despite what the cliche about it's sometimes harder to play against 10 men, statistically it really isn't. So, you do tend to score more goals against 10 players. So that's an interesting one. And I don't know how many minutes they've been playing against 10 players. So was the sending off on the 2nd minute, or was it on the 88th minute? You know what I mean? Or that's going to have a huge difference. And I'll just throw that back at you to research.
Yes.
So, but listen, I think this is an incredibly dangerous game, right? Hibs, I actually think their underlying data is far better than the results they've been having. They won 4 in a row, then they lost in midweek there against Dundee United, who did a number on them, in the sense that Dundee United only had like 36% possession. They had 1 shot on target from which they scored. Their XG was 0.56, whereas Hibs had 18 shots at goal, 7 on target, XG of 1.31. So it was a pretty kind of freaky result in many ways. But if you look at their underlying data, Hibs have actually got the 3rd best expected goal difference in the league. Expected goal difference is expected goals for minus expected goals against. And after the top 2, Hibs have got the best expected goal difference in the league, and actually their expected goals against is only 0.77, which is, well, the Rangers are 0.64. So that gives you some indication that defensively they're much stronger this year. They force the opposition goalkeeper into 4 saves per game, which is actually second behind us. We're 4.2. And interestingly, in terms of saves that their goalkeeper's having to make, their keeper's only making 1.5 saves a game. That's the lowest in the league. That is the best in the league, right? So they're doing something right at both ends of the field. So I think this is a very, very dangerous game for a team like us. Now, what gives me a little bit of hope is that, as I say, they played midweek, and Johnson played the same starting 11 in 3 games in a row, which is quite unusual. And generally speaking, A, because Celtic have a bigger squad, and B, because of the number of games that we play in all competitions, other teams in the Scottish League are not used to playing 3 games in a week, right? So we'll normally have a bit of an advantage. But having said that, we struggled against St Johnstone, and they'd played in midweek the week before as well. So I just think with the injuries, with the fatigue, with the quality of the opposition, I just think it's going to be a really tough game again. And I think that's going to be the way it is between now and the World Cup break, where we can kind of all take a breath and hopefully get injuries back. And then I think my reading of it is that Ange is already prepared for the January transfer window, when hopefully we strengthen again. So I think we're going to have to just live with the fact that it's going to be spotty and scrappy and nasty for the next few games.
Yeah, I can see that being the case. I'm just recovering and remembering I need to keep on my toes when I'm posing a question to Alan Morrison. He's the only person that can tell you your question wasn't researched well enough, never mind the answer. But I'll make sure.
How annoying is that?
Jim, bearing in mind what we've said there about potential tiredness, about the number of games coming up, I take it you're expecting to see changes in the lineup at the weekend, but what kind of changes do you expect to see? Who's going to keep a place for you, and who's going to maybe be rested or rotated?
I just like that spotty, scrappy and nasty. That's my big takeaway today. I'm going to use that again.
Reminds me of me as a teenager, but yeah.
We play the best team. Again, whoever's fit, if everyone's fit and ready to go, as I said before, I don't know what the situation is. Jota still out? Is he still? We don't know.
I don't know what the...
50, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, 50-50, yeah.
Hopefully he plays, and as I said, I'd play Haksabanovic on the other side. I'd play Yakimakis. I think the big guy deserves a game. There's a start. O'Reilly, Hatate picked himself, plus one other. Abelgard possibly maybe give his home debut. I think the back four kind of picks itself. Juranovic, Taylor, Carter Vickers and Jens and Joe Hart. So I think the team's pretty straightforward, I would imagine. If Jota's not fit, you go Forrest right and Haksabanovic in the left. I think Forrest will be quite good in the games he's come on, given his experience. He knows how to beat a man, knows how to beat the ball. If we're going to play Yakimakis in the centre, we need 2 people wide who can put a good ball into the centre to give the big guy a chance. I'd leave Abad out, I'd leave Maeda out. I think they could do a wee break. So that's who I'd go with tomorrow.
Yeah, it's Abelgard, Alan, is somebody that you wrote about. I was rather scathing of him in my comments in the group chat a couple of weeks ago after a performance I didn't think was particularly up to scratch, but you were quite rightly pointed out that he has been struggling to find a place to train and get up to match fitness, and perhaps there's more to see from him in the coming weeks. Do you agree with Jim that he's potentially going to see an awful lot of football in these next few weeks, and if so, what are you expecting to see from him?
I hope so. He's highly regarded. We've absolutely done, and if we are, the deal with Ruben Kazan is shrouded in secrecy. I'm sure it's all above board and all that, but it's just a bit of a mystery as to whether is he on loan, have we got a deal in place to sign him, etc., etc. But if we do get him from the Russian club, it's an absolute steal. He's a very highly regarded player. He's not a youngster. He's 26, but he gives us something we just don't have. He gives us a level of athleticism in the middle of the midfield there, and a level of defensive security. Which I know McCarthy is very defensively secure, but he's not very mobile. He has a lot of injuries that have over the years that have kind of caught up with him, and he's not that dynamic 8 that he was when he was a kid. Abelgor is when we played Leipzig and he was like winning headers before it got to the back four, and I was like, it's like your Harry Potter. What spell is this? when were we ever allowed to win headers before it reached our 5'9" centre backs or whatever? So, but all joking aside, he was rusty in that game clearly. And just to recap, people that maybe not know, he played for the Russian club in May, and then he didn't play again until he came on, I think, he might have had 2 minutes in the game before, against Leipzig pretty much. And he also over the kind of our summer at least, he was having to find teams to train with. So he's not had a club to train with on a regular basis. So he's going to be a little bit behind. But no, I'm very excited to see him. He already, the number of challenges that he won in the defensive third, the number of headers that he won, really encouraging. Not seen a lot of him in terms of ball progression, because obviously that's again another reason why McCarthy's not a good fit, because it's one thing, winning tackles, and O'Reilly was brilliant at that on Tuesday night. But you've also then got to progress the ball quickly, which is Callum McGregor's great strength is the speed at which he then progresses the ball, and that's what Celtic need to play that way. So we haven't seen that really from him yet, because he's played away in Leipzig where he was facing a swarm of opposition players running towards him, and he's had 5 minutes here or there. So yeah, but I think he's going to be a good player for Celtic, and I hope to see more of him.
One position, Jim, that we don't often talk about rotating for various reasons is the goalkeeper position. You touched on it earlier with the goal away against Leipzig that Joe Hart had a huge hand in conceding. There have been question marks over whether it would be time to consider Siegrist as an alternative option. Is he somebody you think, would you give him game time over the next few weeks as well, or is it a case of the goalkeeper's a bit of a separate situation and keep him in goal as much as you can?
Play best team. Motherwell next Wednesday. That's Siegrist's game. Come in for that, I'd imagine. If the Bernabeu turns out to be a dead rubber, then he plays in that game. Always play your best team. I mean, I think Joe Hart's been unfairly maligned. It was a daft mistake he made in Leipzig last week. Why put the ball in the centre rather than putting the wing? Don't know. Was it his fault with the goal against Motherwell? Or Janovic? Don't know. But apart from that, I mean, in the Leipzig game, first game, he did a number of really, really good saves. St Johnstone last week, the big chance they had, big chap puts onto the post. Always play the best team, Laura, and Joe Hart's part of the best team, so he definitely play Joe Hart. In the League Cup, as I said, I'm personally, in my opinion, not that fussed about the League Cup, and that's where you give guys like Siegrist a game.
Yeah, I'm certain we will see him in the League Cup, possibly. Fingers crossed, no injuries to Joe Hart, and we won't see too much of Siegrist in the more important games. Alan, I guess the only other thing that I wanted to discuss today is, between now and the end of the season, or the end of this particular run up to the World Cup, I should say, is I heard somebody mention the other day, and I have no reason to believe this is true or not, but it was an interesting thing nonetheless. The talk about maybe leaning more heavily on sports science to dictate how we use the players that we've got, bringing players off at apparently arbitrary moments in matches, just because they've played a certain number of minutes in a certain number of days and that kind of thing. Is that something that you would be encouraged to see getting used a little bit more often, especially as the games are so tightly packed together?
Absolutely, without any doubt at all. I'd be astonished and hugely disappointed if we're not monitoring, physiological data as the game's actually going on. I mean, they wear these vests. I presume that's part of the reason for it. I mean, you have to do that. The best way to approach, injury is to be preventative and to understand what are the triggers and the warning signs of a player. But I know a guy I know that plays rugby to a very high level. Those people in the Scotland setup, they know that, for example, I talked about recovery runs. So one of the things I had in my mind is that they know that players have only got so many 50-yard sprints in them in a game. And if your fullback is bombed up the line 10 times, whatever, you could be pretty sure he hasn't got any left. And therefore, it's just, that's a very simple example. But you're looking at not just because you're actually looking at not just the number of sprints, you're looking at the intensity of the sprint, the distance covered, the speed, right? And that can give you a lot of data in terms of how much of your finite energy have you used up. And from monitoring during training, you can see what the signs are for decreasing performance. So, for example, we could all see on Tuesday night that Hatate was struggling around the 60-minute mark, right? He was getting caught in possession. He just wasn't reacting quickly enough. He was getting overpowered. He was turning the ball over, and he got subbed out on 65 minutes, which is the right decision. That's probably from the eye test. Hopefully, there was some data behind that as well. So absolutely, you have to. And to me, we should be doing more to prevent injuries. I mean, I think it was pretty shocking, really. Like players to me last season, Turnbull and Kyogo were overplayed. There must have been warning signs in the data that these guys were just being used too much. And sure enough, they both succumbed to very serious injuries that put them out for months and months at a time. I believe that a couple of years ago, our plucky neighbours across the city, they took on something, I think it's called Zone 7. I might have that name wrong, so apologies to anybody who's watching who works for the company. Software and capabilities that allow you to kind of monitor this sort of thing. I'd be really hoping that Celtic are investing in something similar, or have done. I think Ange is very much imbued in the City Group philosophy in terms of you're stressing every kind of marginal gain that you can get, and that sports science and technology should be a cornerstone of everything that we do. You'd be astonished if I said anything different.
Yeah, I think they took Zone 7 a little bit too literally the other night, but we won't go there. Jim, the question I was going to ask you on the back of that Alan was talking about there, the use of sports science and that kind of thing. Another conversation I was having with the people I was watching the game with on Tuesday night was some were of the belief that this "we never stop" mentality, while it makes a great slogan and we love to hear it and it's an idealistic way to play football, some that I was talking to believed that Ange expects a little bit too much physically of his players, and that's why, especially in games against the likes of Leipzig, we can hold out for the majority of the game and then drop off because we are seemingly physically exhausted. Do you think that's something he's maybe learned that he needs to change, or is this Ange we're talking about, he's not going to do that?
I think this is more of Alan's area, his expertise. What I found interesting last Saturday is he took off Hatate and he was running the show. And I'm thinking, why is he taking Hatate off? Because he's the one guy that was going to do something in the game. Was that down to what Alan just said there about, well, he's done a certain number of minutes and that's all we get out of him? When you're playing so well and you're the main guy in the team, do you still take him off even though you think beforehand you should do X minutes? Is that what you do, Alan? Is that how it works?
I don't think it's a simple equation of you've played 65 minutes and therefore I'm taking you off. I think it's, unless, I mean, you might do that on occasion, for example, where you know that a player really, you want to risk them for more than 20 minutes in the game, so that's all the maximum I'm going to give you, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I'm just struggling to remember now that game really, in terms of why it didn't resonate with me when we took Hatate off, in the sense that it didn't strike me as being a particularly unusual sort of move. But I guess it's more to do with, for me, you might play 65 minutes and made 10 sprints and 10 recovery runs, or you might play 65 minutes and made 3. And in which case, you should be able to kind of carry on for the next 25 minutes. So, I mean, you need to look at a range of things, I would imagine. And
I think there's been some games, certainly this season, where he's taken off players that you thought, that's a bit odd, because they're playing so well. And it's whether it's down to that sports science thing that says, are they actually monitoring in-game by saying he's done X, so therefore it's time for him to come off? The kind of eye test is like, he's my best player, keep him on. Why are you taking him off? And also the big man tends to go with this 3 subs. And I thought that kind of slightly disrupted things the other night. So, that's a bit of a thing.
It was the right decision, because all 3 of those players, I mean, I noticed at the same time as Hatate was, his energy drained, Haksabanovic just has had as well. So I thought it was the right call at the right time the other night. I have been critical of Postecoglou and his substitutions. I think it's the one area that in game that he doesn't always get right. It's not an exact science, but it probably should be when it comes to players' injury. So another example from St Johnstone game was that Jota was clearly struggling from about 30 minutes in the first half, I think it was. And it was obvious because, to me, watching it, because every time he got the ball, he just turned back and gave it back again. He never once ran with it. He never once tried to take his... That's completely unlike Jota, because Jota always tries to be aggressive, always tries to get forward. And it was obvious to me after 30 minutes there was something badly wrong with him and he couldn't function as effectively. And also that was at the point in the game where we pretty much stopped creating anything. I know we scored on 43 minutes, but we actually didn't have a shot in the game after the 19th minute. Till half-time, we didn't have a single shot, right? And part of that was that Jota was completely kind of neutered. To me, I'd have taken him off on 30 minutes because it just he's so important to the team, and if there was no outlet there. So I think if we are using science, it's not all the time, and it's the eye test is still dominant, and we're not making those judgments quite perfectly. And I don't suspect anyone ever does, but it's certainly an area for improvement. Because alongside "we never stop" is also the slogan, we're never comfortable, and those two things kind of go together. So you said, are you pushing the players beyond what they're capable of? That almost is part of Ange's philosophy, in that he wants you to move outside your comfort zone, not just mentally in terms of how good am I as a player, but physically in terms of what am I capable of.
It'll be interesting to see how it affects the team the rest of the run into the World Cup anyway, and hopefully we can see them get more positive results than negative ones out the next few weeks, starting with Hibs this weekend. We will see what happens. We'll be here as always with the game coverage for you here on Axom. Thank you to Jim, to Jim and to Alan, and to everybody watching in the comments. It was really appreciated, and we'll see you this weekend.
Cheers, Laura.
Thank you.